patients really value the option of telehealth, even though it's one of these things that they end up not using very often, if at all. And so I'm not saying folks shouldn't be investing in telehealth. It is something that consumers value. It's not just not something that they use. It's, I guess, it's a little bit like buying an off-road car. How often do you really go off-road? But you like the idea of being able to do that. And so we found our off-road vehicle for healthcare. Then occasionally it does create increased utility.
New choices, new players, new models of care. Consumer-first healthcare is everywhere. For us to build the future, to see what's new, we gotta look at the world from a different point of view. Consumer innovation ain't going away. I say it's here to stay. Today it leads the way. We gotta drop the silos. We're all the same team. Experience, business, tech, and marketing. So join us now. Join the revolution. Consumer-first health is the evolution. Status quo or like status no. Yeah, this is the healthcare rap. Yo, come on, let's go. Hey, welcome back to the leading podcast about consumer-centered healthcare. This is episode 373. I'm Jared Johnson, and here's what's going to go down today. We have the flavor of the week about Amazon launching a new service competitive to hims and hers. What's the consumer insight that this new service is based on? And how can we bypass the bias against retailers to more quickly design consumer-centered products and services? I'll talk about that. Then we welcome Dr. Oliver Kharraz, CEO and founder of Zocdoc. As you might expect, he has so many insights on what actually drives healthcare behaviors and influences consumers' choices. So let's get right to the awesomeness. Are you ready? Let's go. Flavor of the week. It feels a little funny saying that Amazon is just now starting to hit its stride in healthcare, but truly I feel like they're just getting going. Their latest announcement on November 14th was that Amazon One Medical is rolling out telehealth treatment services in competition with Ro and Hims and Hers. According to Fierce Healthcare, Amazon One Medical is rolling out a new service to provide Prime members access to clinical treatments for common health and lifestyle conditions like men's hair loss and anti-aging skincare. The new service builds on Amazon One Medical's existing pay-per-visit telehealth service that offers healthcare for more than 30 common conditions. The service offers a subscription plan with low upfront monthly pricing for a clinical visit, treatment plan, and free medication delivery in certain areas. The service initially focuses on 5 conditions: anti-aging skincare treatment, men's hair loss, erectile dysfunction, eyelash growth, and motion sickness. Through the service, Prime members can get anti-aging skincare treatment from $10 a month, men's hair loss solutions from $16 a month, ED treatment from $19 a month, eyelash growth solutions from $43 a month, and treatment for motion sickness from $2 a use, using Prime RX at checkout. The insight that this offering seems to be based on is that consumers don't always view health and wellness separately. They'll pull whichever lever they believe they need to get them to feel better sooner. People would rather do anything than have to see a doctor. My other comment is that if this is the productization of healthcare that people oppose, better get used to it. Traditional healthcare continues to bark at non-traditional players like Amazon, telling them that healthcare is about people and services, not products. And Amazon's response continues to be, focus on what consumers really want, delivered in a way that exceeds their expectations, and don't get dragged down by the gravity of how things have been done for hundreds of years. Just look for a better way. Now, Amazon's kingdom might not ever extend to the entire healthcare universe, and maybe one reason is because there are a lot of places where their customer obsession and supply chain prowess can't create something that's scalable, sustainable, and delightful to customers. But in the areas where that is the case, better look for more announcements like this, because believe me, they'll find every single one of them. The quicker we can bypass the bias against retailers, the quicker we can learn from them, and ultimately create more services and products that will lead people to more actively engage in their health. Let's learn from the same consumer insights that power Amazon's new health and wellness services to design more consumer-centered services everywhere. That's another way that we'll build the healthcare of tomorrow, and that's the flavor of the week. The flow. All right, let's get to the flow. Please give it up for our guest this week. We're here with Dr. Oliver Kharraz, the CEO and founder of Zocdoc. I'm also here with Zane. I want to welcome you back. Zane, how are things been?
Not bad, Jared. Things are good. Settling down from some of the conferences we're at last week. And this show is being recorded on election night. And so we're gearing up for that. So we'll see where we end up as a nation tonight, which kind of feels existential as we're recording this podcast.
Agreed. Just speaking with the health system leader yesterday who said they had spent a couple of hours in the morning with their leadership team planning for all the contingencies of what could happen.
Wow.
Said it was a bit of a sobering call, so no surprise there. Yeah, they were having to plan for everything. But with that, I'm curious what you hope we'll hear today with our interview with Dr. Kharraz here, Zane. What do you hope we focus on?
Yeah, probably the biggest thing for me is, there's a lot of digital health companies that are out there now who talk about this notion of marketplace. Even where I work at, we have a marketplace. And so I'm really interested to hear how Zocdoc thinks about marketplace. In my view, they're one of the first to be out there. And so really looking to see how they think about it, where are those component parts, and how it might be different than other quote unquote marketplaces in healthcare.
Love it. Well, with that, tell you what, let's welcome in Oliver. Hey, welcome to the Healthcare Wrap.
Hey, good to be here.
We're so excited about this. I think one thing that's going to be unique about this conversation compared to some of the other ones we've had, we have some relatively new founders whose organizations have been around, in terms of weeks or months versus years or decades. And I'm really excited about that. But let's start off helping our listeners get to know you a little bit. Like, what's something that most listeners might not know about you, even those who are familiar with you and the work you've done?
One thing that's true about me is that I'm very deeply rooted in healthcare. And yes, I'm a physician. I spent nearly a decade of my life training and practicing medicine. But I actually have a 300-year family tradition of being doctors. And so the general ethos is really very, very deeply ingrained in me. And I'm kind of breaking the mold a little bit by starting Zocdoc. And this is partially because I realized that I can help people more at scale through technology than I could ever be doing that as an individual practitioner. But in some ways, med school in itself had the seeds of my future in it. In order to pay my way through college and med school, I actually started a pre-internet online company in the early 90s.
No way.
Seeing the internet coming, and I knew I had to decide whether I want to drop out of college and make my company internet ready, or whether I sell it before everyone else sees the internet coming also. I decided to sell it. Was a great choice, both because it protected me from too much money too early on in life, and because obviously Zocdoc wouldn't exist if I had done that. I sold it. I made my way through med school, but here I am, back into the founder seat.
Fascinating. So my understanding is Zocdoc was founded in 2007, and that's what we're referring to. Everyone knows it. But how do you describe it differently today than those early days that you were just talking about?
Some things have not changed, right? Our North Star is give power to the patient. That's the mission. That's what everyone is aligned around. But obviously, in these last 17, 18 years, we have changed dramatically from a scale perspective, right? We are really proud to be the nation's leading healthcare marketplace, and we have an incredible breadth and depth at this point, with our goal being really to help every patient find every type of care, right? And just to give you sort of a sense for where we are, live in all 50 states, over 100,000 providers on the marketplace, 250 different specialties, 20,000 different insurance plans. On any given day you go on Zocdoc, there's 200,000 new patient appointments available in the next 24 hours, and millions of patients every month take sort of advantage of that and book a wide variety of things. Now, obviously, that took some time to build, and there are some fascinating war stories over the years in terms of how we even got to do that. And something that's not well known is we spent the first 3 years of Zocdoc's existence only in New York, and a good amount of that only on dentists and primary care doctors. And you have to think, when you build a marketplace like Zocdoc, we literally had a huge map of Manhattan in our offices, and we would put little pins in where we had providers, and like different color pins meant different insurances. And we had to sort of manually map out what our coverage was so that when a patient came to Zocdoc, we would actually be able to help them. And that meant, that map determined the route that we would be walking the next day, knocking on individual doctors' practices and going in there, and most of the time getting thrown out, but sometimes getting someone to sign up. I still have a couple of shoes that I've walked the soles through completely from those early days.
What was the pitch, if you will, in those early days? How did you get folks to, believe in this vision that you're selling them on the provider side?
One of the contrarian insights that we had is that providers actually want more patients. When we launched, the average wait time for a patient till they actually sort of could see a doctor, from the time they picked up the phone and dialed for doctors till they had their appointment, was nearly a month. And that's actually still true today. If you want to do it over the phone, it takes an incredible amount of time. What people said back then is, of course, there's a shortage of doctors. Whenever there's a shortage of something, people have to queue up and wait. And our contrarian insight was to say, no, doctors actually have last minute availability because there's last minute cancellations, there's no-shows, there's reschedules, and this is all perishable inventory that goes to waste. Incredible, right? Like if you think about airplanes, right? We have so many different systems to make sure that every airplane seat gets filled, and our fill rate for airplane seats is in the high 90s percentage-wise. Doctors, it's more expensive to sit across of a doctor for an hour than to sit in an airplane seat for an hour. Yet we had no systems whatsoever to capture that valuable perishable inventory when we got started. And so that was the fundamental insight and the fundamental pitch to the doctors. Hey, all the time you're not seeing patients, but you would like to, we can help you fill that. And it turns out that on average, doctors actually have 20 to 30% of their perishable of their inventory go to waste. It's very sad, because just like an airplane, once the plane takes off, there's no way you can fill that seat. Once that appointment slot is gone, there's no way the doctor can see a patient in that slot. And so we were solving this very real problem in a win-win for the patient and the doctor.
I think that's fantastic. And I think what makes it double worse in healthcare is we know intuitively that there are people out there looking for a physician. So the fact that that appointment would go to waste or be perished is like double heartburn for me. Also, just to riff for a minute, on the healthcare rep, we often talk about how some of the solutions to healthcare will be learned from outside industries. And I can't help but think about your reference here to the airlines, or I actually started off in hospitality in hotels where, like healthcare, hotel rooms are perishable. You can't double sell them tomorrow night, right? If you don't sell them tonight. And again, to your point, there's so many systems in place in hospitality and airlines where, if we don't think we're going to sell a room, we're going to put it out there on super discount or call somebody in to fill that. And so totally hear you there on that need, if you will.
The airline industry, obviously, they had Sabre for decades, right? So when they developed these travel sites, it was as easy as plugging into Sabre and just creating a user interface so that consumers could see the availability and book it. In healthcare, as you know well, this isn't the case at all, right? Like there's hundreds of different EHRs. They're not meant to talk to each other. Back in the day, frequently these practices didn't even have internet to connect them. And so our job was not only to build a marketplace, but to also build the Sabre to go with that. And that was very, very complicated, right? We had to make the call. Do we try to migrate the doctors to our own web calendar, or do we integrate with their systems? We made that call to go the hard way and integrate with their individual systems one by one and have the strategic patience to go through this. And it was really a game changer. And it was very hard. Like a fun story that goes underappreciated. Once we had written our first integrations into their calendars, we would still sometimes get cancellations. And we would look at, we do a screen share, we look at their calendar, we look at our copy in the cloud. They were identical. We brought all the smartest people in the company in a room, to try and figure out what's going on. I walked their dogs, I brought them pizza. They couldn't figure it out. Eventually, I would just say, let me just sit next to the office manager and see what's going on there. And then, I get to know the office manager. They show me photos of their kids, their dog. I fix their printer. I teach them better strategies to play Minesweeper. I still couldn't figure out what's going on until one day the doc came out and say, hey, Mary, I'm out next Friday, right? And what does the office manager do? Do they go into their scheduling system and block out next Friday, or do they take a Post-it note, write on it, Doctor out next Friday, and stick that to their monitor, right? So in the real world, of course, these Post-it notes happen, and when you're naive to that, you create a lot of unhappiness on the side of the patient, the doctor, the office manager, and then ultimately Zocdoc. Once you know it's happening, math is your friend, and you can start filtering these things out. And Zocdoc is really an accumulation of 1,000 0.1% solutions of 1,000 post-it note equivalent solutions that we had to find before we could fully take the show on the road.
That's awesome. And I think you're teaching a powerful lesson of actually going to talk to your customers and like being at the site where consumers actually are to observe, what needs to change, what's really happening, and coming up with new innovative products and solutions. Oftentimes on the show, we've done a few shows around like the tools and methods of innovation in healthcare, and design, human-centered design, actually talking to customers is top at the list of things that we encourage innovators to do, and not just innovate on PowerPoint and in a boardroom, that's for sure. I wanted to ask Dr. Kharraz about the experience that patients go through. And so, pretend, I presume some of our listeners may not have ever perused Zocdoc, but could you walk us through, when a consumer comes to Zocdoc to look for care, what's really happening there? Are they looking through reviews? Are there physician profiles posted? Can you talk us through the high level of how a consumer would move through Zocdoc and then ultimately to their site of care?
Consumer comes to Zocdoc or they download the app, and really all they need to put in is what's the thing you need help with? What's your insurance? And then we can typically already geolocate them so we know where they are. And then they immediately see everything they need to make a healthcare decision, right? They see the locations of these doctors. They see who is in network with their insurance. They see the availability, in real time, right? Like, when can this doctor see me for the condition that I put out there? They see reviews that come from a closed Circus review system where only patients that have actually seen that doctor through Zocdoc can leave a review. So that they are verified, unlike some of the other bits of information on the internet. And so now all you need to do is click on one of these available time slots, and you check out the same way you would buy something on Amazon or do anything else in your life. It literally just takes a minute. Now, in the background, lots of complicated things happen, right? Like we read the availability from the doctor scheduling system. We make sure that it follows all the doctor's business rules and they can actually see you during this time for the problem that you indicated. We do an eligibility check on your insurance to make sure that there are no surprises with your coverage after you show up. And then once you book, we write that information back into the doctor's scheduling system and make sure that they have all the information pre-visit that they need to see you. So, but the art of this is to hide most of this complexity from the consumer so that you don't have to worry about, what are the specific rules for this doctor? Which EHR are they on? Are they on Athena? Are they on Epic? Are they on one of hundreds of smaller EHRs? Just like when you book an airplane, you really don't filter whether it's Airbus or Boeing. Maybe these days you do, but like traditionally, maybe you did.
I fly enough now where I've taken mental note of different airplanes, and I prefer Airbus. That's for sure. I fly with Delta, so they have quite a big fleet with them. It's funny you say that.
Fair enough.
Along those lines, what else has changed about the way that people do search for doctors? I mean, we focus a lot on the general desire to have a better experience for consumers saying, I'll engage with my health more if healthcare makes it easier for me to do that. So does that reflect itself in the way that people are searching and the way that they expect it to work when they do log in? And I'm just curious what may have changed with that over the last few years.
I think over the last 17 years since we started, the internet has re-educated us thoroughly on what we should expect from companies we do business with, right? We want everything to be fast, accessible, personalized. We want to be empowered consumers. And we see the same trends now on Zocdoc, right? Where patients prioritize speed to care, right? So the typical appointment on Zocdoc takes place within 24 hours, and the vast majority within 72 hours, right? And that holds true across all specialties. And then this is only possible, obviously, because we can surface that hidden supply and surface these last minute cancellations and reschedules. And one thing consumers now do is, this is actually something where we've seen major trends, they do it on their own time, right? When we first started out, nearly no one used Zocdoc on Saturday, Sundays, and before 8 a.m. and after 5 p.m. because they thought of doctors as something that's only available between 8 and 5, right? And now we see that they're using Zocdoc whenever it works for them, right? And half of all appointments today are booked after hours when the doctor's office is closed. So this is just a massive change. Now, and some other things haven't changed as much, right? So there's obviously a lot of hype, for example, around telehealth. And for a while, I think lots of people thought, well, it's going to displace a lot of in-person visits. But if we put mental health to the side for a second, which is in fact mostly telehealth, but for the other specialties, a tiny fraction, just roughly 8%, were for virtual care in 2023, and the rest was in person because patients maybe have that expectation for these things to be in person, but also I think patients are cognizant of the fact that we have bodies, and in some ways telehealth is a little bit like telepizza, right? Where it's kind of great, except that you cannot really eat the pizza when it's not with you in the same room, and the doctor just cannot look in your throat and cannot listen to your heart and can't poke your abdomen if you're not right there. And the patients don't want that fragmented experience where they get started on a ramp-up experience with telehealth and then have to convert it into a new doctor where they restart and do everything in person. So this is something that's happening. We've actually put out a What Patients Want report last year, and we'll update it this year and put out our second annual report for that in just a few weeks in December. And then we'll sort of share all the detailed booking trends that's available for anyone in the industry to peruse.
That's fantastic. We'll have to certainly, Jared, take a look at the report. Just want to cut back to your telepizza comment. We're going to have to hold on to that one. I love that analogy. I think anecdotally, too, there is this perception that there's a greater value just to see your provider in person, to your point that, hey, if there's something else I can take a look at, or even recording a podcast sometimes virtually doesn't feel the same as when we're all in person. And so I totally get the telepizza comment. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's so true. And that does have to do with when we focus so much on what consumers say they want out of an encounter with a healthcare professional, we pay attention to it. And then we also have to synthesize, is that their perception of what they want, or is that actually what they want? Meaning, what types of engagements does a typical consumer patient actually want with their provider? And I think that's a question we've actually been exploring a lot this season, because the word engagement itself, we've learned it means something so different depending on who you're asking. I'm curious what the word engagement means to you. Like when you refer to that, somebody's engaging with their provider, what does that typically mean? And like, has that definition changed as well?
In the context of telehealth, right? Just maybe like closing the loop on this one real quick. We obviously look at when does a patient actually plan for this doctor encounter. And to be clear, we offer telehealth, hybrid, and in-person side by side. We're completely indifferent to the modality that the patient chooses. And what we actually do see is very few patients engage their doctor through telehealth. However, a doctor that can see you in person, that is in driving distance, that also offers telehealth, has a 40% higher chance of being chosen than one who only offers the in-person thing. So the patients really value the option of telehealth, even though it's one of these things that they end up not using very often, if at all. And so I'm not saying folks shouldn't be investing in telehealth. It is something that consumers value. It's just not something that they use. It's, I guess, it's a little bit like buying an off-road car. How often do you really go off-road? But you like the idea of being able to do that. And so we found our off-road vehicle for healthcare. And, then occasionally it does create, increased utility. In terms of engagement, look, I think we continue to see very high loyalty with providers. When we look at sort of patients choosing to go back to the same specialty, where do they go? With overwhelming majority, if they rank their provider 3 stars or more, they will go back to the same provider. It's in the 70 to 80% range. So patients continue to want to have that long-term relationship. At the same time, we see them supplementarily using things like urgent care, much more frequently for more transactional sort of encounters where they just need to be taken care of right now. And so the consumers are dialing in on the right mix between that loyalty and the long-term sort of scout that sort of is with them, throughout the entire healthcare journey. And the transactional, I just need X and I know what I want and need, and I just need someone to give that to me right now. So I think that's how engagement is shifting, particularly in a world where urgent care is more and more part of sort of the healthcare portfolio of consumers.
Sure. What I'm hearing in your response is really, in a sense, Zocdoc is, to your point, providing consumers with choice, but more so, I would say, almost giving them agency to take care into their own hands and pick where they want to go and who they want to see and what provider, what specialty on their terms, what time, which I think is the promise of where we want to go in digital health.
Yeah, I love that word agency. I think that's exactly the frame of mind that we should all have when we create services for patients, which ultimately that's what the entire healthcare system should be about, is to make it work for the patient. That's the ultimate customer of all of this, even though that sometimes isn't as obvious when people go after that. But this is certainly the ethos that we are trying to live.
On the flip side, then, what has been the response like from providers? And so, you've alluded, it sounds like it's been positive with some of the allusions you made, but curious, how has working with Zocdoc maybe changed the way even providers are practicing or thinking or growing their practices or serving their communities?
So providers are actually very open to that. They are probably the number one user of that what patient wants report, and they're very responsive to the feedback. And when we tell providers, well, the average Zocdoc patient looks at 26 different options before they choose you or one of your peers, they say, great, what are the dimensions that are important to the patient, right? How can I make sure that I represent myself and give the patient the information they need to sort of pick their sort of provider and their healthcare journey? And so I think that is very powerful. And because we can break down these elements, I think we can create an environment where providers compete on the dimensions that are actually important to the patient consumer versus things that might just be important in their minds or that the insurance nudges them to do. So this pre-meeting is a very good mechanism to discover the true preference profile of consumers as a whole and individually.
I love that. I feel actually just yesterday I was chatting with a colleague. We were talking about healthcare marketing in general, primarily from primarily from health systems, which is terrible. And what we were lamenting about is how so many health systems are focused on, posting vanity metrics like US News and World Report or quality scores or, physician awards that really don't mean anything to consumers, and how much we wish traditional health systems would lean into what you're talking about is discovering what are the things that consumers actually care about. Like, what are they judging providers based on, or broader health systems, and leaning into that as opposed to these traditional, historic, in a sense, paternalistic vanity measures that don't mean anything to anyone, right? And so definitely hear you on that one. We interview obviously a lot of folks on the podcast, some from the traditional world and some from call it the modern world. And most folks in the modern world are leaning into things like you, where they're harnessing the data, getting very clear and honest about what people are making their purchasing preferences on and doubling down into it. And so that's fantastic.
We're going to be referring back to this interview for a long time. When you look at the future of healthcare in our country, what gives you hope? What keeps you going? And what's a destination where you hope that some of this gets us to a better place?
When I think about the future, the first thing that I'll say is the trends are not our friend here, right? If you look at the cost curve, it gets more expensive. If you look at the value for money, there's no correlation between the rates we pay and the quality of the care we get. And if I look at affordability, the out-of-pocket spending by Americans is just going through the roof. And at the same time, we have a system of very long wait times, emergency room overutilization, pricing obfuscation, despite everything that's going on there. And you could spend a lot of time, at least a couple of podcasts worth of just talking about the problems. And I think if we let trends continue, this is the problem of our generation, and it will either break the bank or our health or both, and we can't let any of that happen. That's all unacceptable. But obviously, as an entrepreneur, I'm an optimist, right? And I think while there aren't any silver bullets, I think technology can really help improve cost, quality, and access all at the same time. And that's ultimately what made me start Zocdoc, is because that's what we want to do. And I want to make healthcare work more like any other consumer category. Like if you think about it, What has Booking.com done for travel? What has OpenTable done for restaurants? Airbnb for homestays, right? They've brought marketplaces to bear, and Zocdoc is sort of a marketplace in healthcare that can bring market forces to healthcare. We talked about sort of discovering the true consumer preferences, and I think that we will help patients make more informed choices across these dimensions that are important, and enable healthcare providers to respond to that and compete really on the dimensions that are important to consumers, as they do in every other market, right? That you're in Detroit, when you buy a car, you can compare it on every dimension. You know precisely what it costs. That's how healthcare should work as well.
Transparency, yep.
It's such a perfect place for us to wrap up, and thanks for sharing that. And you're right, we could focus on all the problems, these generational problems, and I think it's apropos part of our conversation to keep talking about that, but to be able to focus on what is going right and where things are leading us in whole new directions. So love to wrap on that point. And with that, say thank you, Oliver, for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with Dr. Oliver Kharraz from Zocdoc. Thanks for joining us today.
It was great to be here.